AskReddit by Jill 520. What would happen if everyone over 70 died tomorrow? Butterscotch stocks would plummet. And all those strawberry candies would just suddenly vanish. Layoffs at retirement centers. I would be so fucked in my career. I run activities for an assisted living, and that would wipe out like 80% of my residents. I would also be heartbroken because my residents are my best friends. Losing one is really hard on me, but losing so many at once would be devastating. Mass graves for millions of corpses that would be decaying in homes and streets with no capacity for coroners and cemeteries to take them fast enough. Japan would see its population instantly drop by nearly 29 million people. That's nearly 5x the number of deaths from the Holocaust, happening overnight. Edit, I was mistaken. More like 2.6x the number of deaths. Dozens of comments below say that the total casualties was closer to 11 million once all the other victims besides Jews are accounted for. 70 plus aged people are something like 25% of Japan's population. Such an event would also completely change the distribution of resources since the senior population, which is costly to care for and not very productive, would go away. Politics would change dramatically as senior voters have different priorities than the young. Edit, and many politicians are quite old, so politics would change by many politicians dying off as well. No Walmart greeters. Welcome to Walmart, now get your shit and get out. Us politics would be interesting. Congress would be decimated. But there's a downside. A large funeral, and a lot of governments falling apart. I don't know any European governments with many people over 70 in power. Don't know about the rest of the world, but this is a very American thing at the moment. I'd be back to fucking haunt you. Were the family in ruins? I would be sad because of my grandparents. Decent people. So many grandparents raising their grandchildren. We would have a lot of orphans. Japan would fucking collapse. We lose Miyamoto no. The villages would be wiped out. And then the secrets come out from below. 700 plus million people dying would overload our capability to deal with the bodies. Bring out your dead. We'd have to fill most congressional seats. Also, 2 Supreme Court spots would open up, Alito, Thomas. 2 others barely made the cut, Roberts and Sotomayor are both 68. We'd need a new president, majority and minority Senate leaders, President pro tempore of the Senate, 4th in line for succession, Treasury Secretary, and Attorney General. Lucky Secretary of Defense made the cut by a couple of months. That's a fair amount of disruption right there. Lots of grieving people, even more people scared they are next and demanding answers yesterday. Utter chaos trying to bury so many people at once. An even bigger companion animal crises. The people who love them would miss them. Why is this not top comment? Half of the world would be paralyzed with grief. I'd get my inheritance much sooner. This isn't a good thing. I lost my mom at 26, she was 58, and I'll be losing my dad in the next year, he's 89, both to cancer. I'm not ready to lose him just yet. I can't relate completely to all that you're going through at all, because I still have my parents. Yet, my mother epilepsy seems to be causing early stages of dementia or at the very least much lower capacity to understand and remember things. And my father's a narcissistic alcoholic whom I have lost so many times that he's just a hair split away from me having to cut him off completely. So, approaching 26, I also have the feeling of losing my parents soon. How soon? I don't know, but I have grieved continuously, and I hope the shock won't be too much for you or me when the time comes. All the best wishes from a random person on the internet. The year was 2023. Changes in cosmic radiation caused the human genome to mutate and flip a kill switch on anyone that had reached 70 Earth years old, popping their telomeres and unraveling their DNA like spaghetti. Panic and confusion set in, and within days, the horror of the stench drove people to madness. We burned bodies for days while the militaries of the world stood over their respective populations, demanding them to work around the clock. Some days I still feel the heat of those fires on a hot summer afternoon. Nothing could have prepared us for what came next. 365 days later, it happened again. All structure broke down and everyone just stopped caring. Humans broke out into tribes based on generations. Bodies rotted in the open, disease was rampant, and housepets had become feral hunters as ruthless as the roaming bands of former suburbanite marauders they once considered their masters. It's been 8 years since that day. I'd read this book. My nana would die and that would be sad. It's her birthday Saturday, so she'd never make it to 94. Happy birthday to your nana. My dad will be 90 in September and he's on palliative care with cancer, so I'm really hoping he sees that day. All the oldest people in the world will be 69. Nice. We'd have to start saying OKXR. Oh, so now you'd notice us? Being over 70 myself, I think I'd be plenty pissed off. Given the context, I think that would be highly unlikely. That would be pretty catastrophic and completely rock the world economies and governments. There are so many lines of work, products, and services that are specific to or heavily leveraged by the elderly. A ton of businesses would shut down overnight. It would lead to a major evolution of political, economic, and societal systems. Just imagine what could happen in the United States with that large of a voter base suddenly gone. The elderly don't often share the same sentiments as the young. Things would change quick. Edit. The more I think about this, the more I realize how fucked we would be. Realistically, it'd probably be anarchy. You'd have to retool quite a bit. The world relies on the young replacing the old. In all honesty, it would be a pandemic. No one would be able to deal with that made of bodies. The crematoriums would be running 24/7. No one would be able to get a casket funeral. Just do mass burnings and graves, it won't take that long. I'd be the only one watching Barnaby Jones. Residential real estate market would crash. You say crash, I hear suddenly becomes affordable. We could stop worrying about how to fund Social Security. And millions of Americans would wonder, but why are they still taking it out of my paycheck if they haven't made any plans to pay for my retirement with it? Coroner mortuary and or funeral home services backlogs. Cemetery graveyard plot and headstone shortages. Mass panic and government overreaction. New conspiracy theories. Politicization of the crisis. Mainstream media misinformation, mostly unintentional. Shortages in other seemingly unrelated products and services. TP anyone? A huge spike in depression and suicide as a result of the loss of so many grandparents, parents, co-workers, and friends all at once. The transfer of a large amount of wealth to both the government, estate taxes, and the next generation, mostly current 40 to 55-year-olds. The shuttering, and related mass unemployment, of most assisted living retirement communities, rest homes and employees. The same for most hospice wards in hospitals and hospice services in general. Bullet. The laughable content on our terrible Facebook memes would dry up rapidly. There might be some social security money left for me. I'd be on my way to the crematorium. Imagine if this actually happens tomorrow. And the only warning we got was this thread. The presidency of the US would go to Harris. Huge pieces of culture lost. This is something I never thought about. There are so many efforts now to preserve and restore indigenous languages. Entire languages would disappear instantly. A higher percentage of people would be annoyed about Brexit. Childcare costs would really impact the adult children who rely on old grandparents. Remember what happened during the heyday of COVID? Funeral homes overwhelmed, bodies stacked in freezer trucks on the street. And that was nothing compared to having something like 40 million people suddenly all die at the same time. There are 56 million people in the US that are 65 plus, I'm not sure how many are 70 plus, but it has to be a lot. The US economy would tank as well. Huge swaths of the economy would tank overnight. Home rent prices would plummet due to all the newly available homes apartments. The healthcare system would require massive layoffs. It would be even worse in countries with high elderly to young ratios, like Japan, China or South Korea. My wife would die and I would come looking for you. A lot of Redditors would suddenly not be able to make rent next month. Maybe someone in my generation could snag one of the homes for sale before the 50-year-olds get them. The swimming pool industry would lose half its customers. Grandparents' days would be a lot quieter. Retirement homes would have a ton of vacancies. And those little candies, you know, the ones would cease to exist. I didn't know swimming pools were an over 70 thing. Is it because the rest of us can't afford a pool, or the land to build one on? I'm in my 30s and fucking love pools. A lot of leftover public pension money here in my country.